All right. Well, welcome everyone again to our July Lunch and Learn on the effects of purity culture. And we're going to talk a lot about the effects that this has on underserved populations as well as victims of domestic and sexual violence. So we welcome any questions that you have throughout the presentation. Just let us know in the chat. And our speaker today is Mackenzie Lyon. I've had the privilege of working with her as an intern here at the Coalition. Mackenzie graduated with a BA in English Language Arts Education and was a middle school English teacher for 2 years during the pandemic. So big shout out to you for that. After seeing the immense need for quality mental health services for her students, she found her true passion in life, which is mental health in LGBTQ+ youth. She is currently taking classes for her master's in social work and looks forward to creating a transitional housing community for LGBTQ youth and elders in her small hometown in Findlay, Ohio. So without further ado, Mackenzie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chloe. Okay, so today we're going to go over the effects of purity culture. And so as Chloe said, I was an intern at the Tennessee Coalition and really enjoyed my time there and my experience there. I grew up in evangelical Christianity where purity culture was and is ever present. Although I have many personal experiences with purity culture, this presentation is based on research and others' experiences beyond my own. And another note, I just want to mention that, purity culture really targets men and women in the binary terms. It does not mention anything to do with LGBTQ+ or non-binary people. So as I go through this presentation, I will be referring to people as men and women and strictly in those two contexts. So please forgive the exclusionary language. The research that was done and the information that I was able to obtain, again, did not have anything to do with LGBTQ and non-binary people. So with that, let's get started. Maybe? There we go. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what purity culture is, how it got started, the different things that define the culture, the effects that purity culture has, where it's at now, and how we can heal from a religious trauma which was caused by purity culture. So what exactly is purity culture? Purity culture is the term often used for the evangelical movement that attempts to promote a biblical view of purity. This basically discourages dating and any premarital sex or anything to do with sex before marriage. Ultimately, the goal is to remain pure at all costs before marriage. There are tools such as purity pledges, rings, and true love weights on this slide, as you can see in these pictures. But we will discuss these later on in the presentation. So if you have any questions about them, I do ask that you save those specific questions for later, just because we will be touching on these specific items as well. So purity culture got started actually in the late 1880s in England, and it spread to America and throughout the world. But this specific purity culture we're talking about peaked in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It was a result of the sexual awakening. I'm sorry. It was a result, sorry about that. It was a result of the sexual awakening in the 1960s and 70s. And so people really pushed purity because of all the sex that they saw, and it really disturbed them. And so purity culture is within a lot of religious environments, but specifically the Christian church is where it gets its most momentum. Also, political funding contributes to purity culture, which is really unfortunate. There's such a thing as the Chastity Bill, which is actually called the Adolescent Family Life Act, or AFLA. It's a United States federal law enacted during the Reagan administration. AFLA provided funding for a series of social programs aimed at promoting abstinence through reproductive health education. So basically, any sex ed was taught through abstinence. And another movement by the Southern Baptist Church was called True Love Waits. It's an international Christian group that promotes sexual abstinence outside of marriage for teenagers and college students. True Love Waits was created in 1993 by the Southern Baptist, and it's sponsored by Lifeway Christian Resources, which is a huge organization that has taken, the purity movement upon themselves to spread throughout the world. Another significant part of purity culture is the silver ring thing. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but it is an American Virginity Pledge program founded in 1995 by Denny Patton. This program encouraged teens and young adults to remain sexually abstinent until marriage. And for a few years, it was partially funded by the US federal government. It drew on Christian theology, and the silver ring thing uses rock and hip hop concert style events in an attempt to appeal to 21st century teenagers. And also in 1997, Joshua Harris wrote, "I Kissed Dating Goodbye." And I'm curious, could you answer in the chat, how many of you have heard of that book? Actually, this is the title of the cover of the book right here. Have any of you heard of this book or read it?
There's a lot of people in the chat there's a couple people in the chat that said they had heard of it. A few people that said they hadn't. Personally, I have heard of it. We were encouraged to read it in school, but it wasn't required of us. But I had a lot of friends who read it.
Yeah, so this book was kind of like, except for the Bible itself, the Bible of Christian dating. It encouraged courtship versus dating. And so in that sense, it really encouraged parental supervision and parental involvement when it came to getting to know your significant other. And it also encouraged you to find one person and stick to that one person until marriage. It really didn't encourage you to, explore other people to find the right one to get married to. It also discouraged kissing before marriage, especially sex, but I thought it was very significant that it discouraged kissing before marriage, which it did take it to the extreme levels. And, personally, a lot of my friends use this as their dating Bible. I mean, this was very influential for them.
Lorraine in the comments said that one of our college professors made everyone read it in class.
Holy moly. Yeah. I mean, that's not surprising, but also not okay. Yeah. So some examples, people, and events that shape purity culture include abstinence-only sex education. I mean, when I think of purity culture, this is the first thing I think of. And to share a personal anecdote, when we had the talk in high school, it was pure abstinence, no actual sex education was given. And they passed the cup around and we all had to spit in the cup. And the last person to hold the cup was told, okay, if you have a partner or if you had other sexual partners, this is what you or your partner will be drinking because of having other sexual partners. And so that metaphor really stuck with me. It really made me afraid of sex. I think it made a lot of people afraid of sex. And I am really interested to hear some of the other metaphors that were used in your sex education. If abstinence was taught, what sort of metaphors were used? And you're also, in this moment, you're also welcome to shout them out too.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to unmute yourselves. I'll go ahead as people are gathering their thoughts, but I went to a private Christian school growing up in elementary, middle, and high school. And when we finally got to our quote sex ed class, it wasn't a sex ed class, it was an abstinence only class. The analogy that they used was a tissue, just like a Kleenex. And the teacher, she passed it around the room. She had everybody like wipe their hands on it. She blew her nose in it. She ripped little pieces of it. She put it on the floor and like stomped on it and like used it to wipe up something on her desk and all these things. And at the end, she was like, this is your body if you have sex before marriage. And this is what you're giving your future husband. Because at that time, they split the girls and the boys into two separate groups. So it was all very gendered, all very binary, but that was the example that we were given. So similar, but I don't think quite as gross as this bit cup. That is, I hadn't heard that before. That is truly horrific.
Anyone else care to share?
Mine was similar, but it was a male youth pastor who asked who wants Skittles, and everyone was like, me, I want Skittles. And then he put them in his mouth and chewed them up and spit them back in his hand and was like, who wants these Skittles now? And everyone's like, ew, gross. And he's like, this is you if you have sex and nobody wants you. Everyone wanted the Skittles before, but nobody wants the Skittles now. I also had a youth pastor say that he hoped that we got HIV the first time we had sex before marriage.
Yeah, that's really damaging and also not okay.
Yeah.
That is horrible. I can't. Sarah Lovelace in the comments said that she had a similar experience, except instead of a tissue, it was a paper heart.
Symbolic.
Yes.
But again, not okay. And, I'd love to hear from one more person before we move on.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
I hope I'm not laggy. Hey, my wife has actually told me about when we both grew up in a very conservative Church of Christ Christian background. And so she told me about a minister that had the similar kind of same story that Chloe shared and that somebody put in the chat, but it was a flower, and how saying, since nobody has messed with this flower and everything, you're pure and beautiful. But as soon as somebody starts plucking off petals, which he was relating that to sex, you start becoming, dirty and disgusting. And who wants a flower with no petals is basically what they said. So yeah, pretty similar to what Chloe said, but with a flower instead. So yeah.
Yeah. And, the question is, what message are they really giving out?
There's another comment. Haley said that, sorry, her mic isn't working, but she said she had a similar experience of Skittles, but it was cookies instead. And then Anna Harness said, I didn't experience any of this, but I'm just amazed with how disgusting these activities make sex seem and how degrading to a woman's body. But amen that.
Yeah, these are very degrading, especially to a woman's body, because there really was a double standard. Men were told, well, try to remain abstinent because your wife will be a virgin, and so you should try to match. But if you don't, hey, you're a man. And on the other hand, there was this strict sex was forbidden, and if you had sex, you deserved what you got, in terms of violence and dating violence, and which again is not okay. But that was the culture that a lot of us grew up in. So some of the other examples include side hugs. So I very distinctly remember hugging a friend that was of the opposite sex, and I was scolded because I did not give him a side hug, because I was tempting him by, putting front on front in a hug. And so ultimately, a lot of things were over sexualized that did not need to be sexualized. Also, some other examples include those purity rings, purity pledges, which we'll go more into detail on purity rings and purity pledges in a little bit. Slut shaming. I mean, if a woman dresses without the consideration of men and how they see women, then they will be slut shamed. I know I was guilty of slut shaming. I am not okay with how I slut shame people. But again, it was the culture that we grew up in. Anyone that did not dress conservatively were not considered part of the club. They were considered dirty. Another example is complementarianism, which is where men are head of the household and they make the decisions for the family, they feed the family, they work for the family. And so therefore it is the woman's role to support the man in whatever he needs. That includes sexual desire. And so, the image that that this presents is men have sexual desires that need to be taken care of. And even if women don't want to have that sex, they will have that sex in order to take care of the man, which is the ultimate goal. So in that sense, there is this Bible verse that was often quoted to me by a close family friend who was a pastor. Thinking back, it's a little creepy now, but he often quoted, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior." Ephesians 5:22-23. So what people often don't realize is this is taken out of context. The very next Bible verse tells husbands to serve their wives. And but this particular verse is used very often as a way to fuel that biblical reference for sexual purity and for complementarianism in the family. As for people that have influenced purity culture, Joshua Harris, who wrote the iconic "I Kiss Dating Goodbye" that we just talked about, where they encourage courtship and not kissing until marriage. I know I had a lot of friends that did not kiss until marriage, and the night of you being married does not change automatically, just because you have saved every single sexual encounter for this singular person. Celebrities have also influenced this. I don't know if anyone remembers the Jonas Brothers, Miley Cyrus, Demi Lovato. They all had purity rings at some point. Lifeway Ministries, they created the True Love Waits youth conferences. They heavily influenced the purity culture because of these True Love Waits conferences. These are huge conferences that people attended all over the nation. Randy Wilson was the creator of purity balls. So if you don't actually, how many of you have heard of what purity balls are or even attended a purity ball?
We've got 2 yeses in the comment, and then Phyllis said, I know what it is. Megan said, definitely heard of it, but never attended. Adriana said, do not know. Amelia said, knew the concept, had to Google the term.
Yeah, so think of like a daddy-daughter dance, okay? Except the daughter is of puberty age, so they're in middle school, sometimes they're in high school. And so there's like this big shebang where the dads and the daughters dance. And at the end, the dads or the fathers, they take the purity pledge for the daughter. And so in this purity pledge, they vow to protect her. They vow to protect her purity, her innocence, until her husband comes along and takes over that role. And so it really just takes away choice. It takes away choice in women with their body, with who they choose to be around. And it especially excludes anyone who isn't in a nuclear family, children who don't have fathers for whatever reason, whether, the dad wasn't there, the dad passed away, or maybe they were part of an LGBTQ family. So it excluded a lot of people, and it also encouraged no choice for women. And also the government helped influence this. It's estimated that the federal government has spent nearly $2 billion in abstinence-only funding since the mid-1990s. That is not that long ago. That's about 26 years ago. So $2 billion. And the federal government is still funding abstinence-only sex education.
Lorraine commented and said, my best friend got pregnant in high school. She was kicked out of our school. She had a miscarriage and was invited to come back if she recommitted to purity. This was done in a public purity ceremony at a church where her dad gave her a purity ring and they said vows. So not a ball, but a church ceremony.
Yeah, that is awful and not okay. But, it's part of the evangelical culture to do things publicly like that. They would confront what is considered to be sin in a public, we're doing this because we love you sort of way. And it's sad that is how it happens. Some events that purity culture or that led to purity culture were the True Love Waits youth conferences that I mentioned. These led to True Love Waits purity pledges, which I will show you an actual purity pledge on the next slide. Purity balls, which we just discussed, and Christian music events such as the Silver Ring thing. So this was like pop and hip hop and rock music events, and then at the end they would make a call. Everyone's heightened with emotion. They would make a call for everyone to come down and make a purity pledge. Here is what a purity pledge looks like.
Phyllis said, I went to a Bible camp that tried to force us to sign purity cards. She was 15, but she refused.
Did you have any consequences, Phyllis? I'm just curious.
Outside of dirty looks, anything else I pretty much just ignored because I was like, you can't force me to do anything that I don't want to do.
Well, way to stand up for yourself. And I'm sorry that included shame. So this is what a purity pledge could have looked like. This is specifically my True Love Waits purity pledge. So as you can see, there's I made a first time commitment, or I renewed a previous commitment. Of course, the parents are involved. And the commitment actually says, believing that true love waits, I make a commitment to God, myself, my family, my friends, my future mate, and my future children to a lifetime of purity, including sexual abstinence from this day until I enter a biblical marriage relationship. A lifetime of purity. This excludes people who have been divorced, women or men who have fled their marriage because it was abusive. It takes away the choice of men and women to remain autonomous about their bodies, about who they choose to be with, and about what they choose to do. I'm curious, have any of you signed a purity pledge? I know Phyllis hasn't.
I probably signed 3 different ones of these, not for any other reason than it was always just like a popular thing to do in my church and school. I think I signed my first one at like 12. And I probably signed another couple of others in like junior high, but it was just always, if you didn't sign them, you received so much backlash from your peers, from youth leaders, from teachers. So always just a thing. Sarah
Same
said,
here.
"Pride is a blast from the past. I definitely have seen the purity card before. I had just forgotten." And then Kate said, "I had a True Love Waits ring, and I asked my dad about it, and he was weirded out by it, but respected that I wanted to do it. I was raised Church of Christ and was told sex before marriage equals hell. After I had sex the first time, I wore the ring for months out of embarrassment, and guilt about sex even crept into my marriage. Still working through it. Purity culture wrecked me and my peers."
Yeah, its influence is exponential. So the ultimate question is, why purity culture? And I think the answer to that is to clear people of sexual sin, right? And does it work? No. As we can see, no. It causes more shame and trauma than if it didn't exist. In fact, many women within this movement are uninformed about their bodies, their sexual feelings, how to protect themselves against STDs and against pregnancy, and warning signs of unhealthy relationships. It dehumanizes women and men. The binary male mind is over-sexualized. If male nature is unavoidably hypersexual and men are unable to control themselves, the logical conclusion is that the only way to avoid sexual sin is to control women.
You have a comment, Haley. I hadn't heard of this, so I wanted to bring it up. But Haley said that promise necklaces were popular in my circle of friends growing up. It's a necklace in the shape of a heart that has a lock in it, and the dad keeps the key and gives it to the husband on his daughter and her husband's wedding day as a part of their wedding ceremony.
Wow, the significance of that is a little creepy. I'm sorry, I can't think of a more eloquent term right now. Thank you for sharing that. That is a significant experience. Absolutely. Actually, all of your experiences are significant. And in that sense, purity culture has harmful psychological, physical, and societal effects that causes trauma in many folds. Some of the lies that contribute to the trauma that happens is, first, this is specifically for cisgender women. Some of the lies include women are responsible for men's sexual sins. Women's bodies are something to be ashamed of. Women shouldn't have sexual desire. A woman's virginity is the only thing of worth about them. Women don't enjoy sex as much as men, therefore men should take it when they can get it, or even when they can't get it, they should still take it. And there's no difference between sexual abuse and sex before marriage, which is called sin leveling, which is basically saying sexual abuse, sex before marriage is the same amount of sin. And that includes when people ask questions, well, what were you wearing? And were you drinking that night? Again, not okay. And these lies contribute to a lack of boundaries. Privacy is seen as deceitful. And, you know, in my church and in a lot of churches that I saw in my research, they had accountability groups. And accountability groups would include group meetings, as well as you would get paired with a partner, and that partner would have access to your email. They would have access to your phone messages. They would listen in on phone conversations between you and whoever you were dating. Again, there was a huge lack of boundaries. And ultimately, like I've said many times before, it's not okay. Are there any other lies that you can think of that purity culture tells women? I would love to hear about them. Again, you're welcome to just shout it out or put it in the chat.
I remember when I was a part of Church of Christ that there was a sermon that they had in regards to women having sex before marriage. I remember very vividly that the pastor said that women who have sex before marriage, they are that man's whore for the rest of their life. And that definitely stuck out to me. And at that point, I started to distance myself from Church of Christ after that happened.
I'm sorry that was your experience.
Did you say that they were their whores? Is that what they said?
Yes, they were saying that no repercussions for the men, but the woman would bear the burden of what happened.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's another lie. Women are not men's whores, especially if they have sex before marriage. Anyone else? Any other lies that you know of or that you can think of that purity culture teaches cisgender women?
Haley said women can't be raped by their husbands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Jordan said it teaches a woman's body and, quote, virtue is not theirs, and teaches sex is to be feared, not something to be enjoyed.
Yeah, I think that's a huge component to purity culture, is that sex is scary. And if you have sex, kind of like what's that movie where the line is from, you get pregnant, you die?
Mean Girls. I was thinking
Yes.
that as soon as you said that. Yeah. Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Mean Girls, that if you have sex, you will get pregnant and you will die. And then he just shoves a bunch of condoms in their faces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that is the reality of a lot of sex education. Any others before we move on to 6 lies that purity culture teaches cisgender men?
Also, Jordan said purity culture equals rape culture, which I could not agree with more.
Yes, actually, we will be moving into that. So good transition. Thank you. No? Okay. So in the same sense as the 6 lies that purity culture teaches women, here are 6 lies that purity culture teaches cisgender men. The first one is men are out of control and are victims of their own minds. Women are a threat to men's pure thoughts. Women must be avoided. Side hugs are a man's best friend when friends with the opposite sex. Women won't want to have consensual sex with them. Women have saved their virginity for them, so they should try to save themselves too. Are there any other lies that you can think of that purity culture tells men? I would love to hear them as well, because this definitely isn't a comprehensible list, or a comprehensive list. Is only a summary of some lies that purity culture tells us about men. And men are just as affected by purity culture as women, just in different ways. I would love to hear some of those.
Haley had a comment that was in modesty cultures, which I guess is under the umbrella of purity culture.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Well, most of my experiences came from like a group. So it was our groups were kind of co-ed. So like all the things that they told us, they kind of told us as a whole. And so with our youth group, like if there was anytime a situation happened that we all like went to hang out together, like that following Sunday, there would be like a sermon that would fall in lines with like maintaining our purity, which it was like really awkward to sit there because there was a huge age gap. So there was like the older elders in the church, and then you had this drop to like the teens, because a lot of the individuals that would probably be considered like Generation X, they had transitioned out of the church.
Gotta love those awkward sermons by, the white male pastor. Yeah, that is definitely, again, not okay, because I think that assuming that you are going to be committing sexual sin at every turn automatically hurts people's chances in redeeming themselves if that's what they choose to do. And so, yeah.
Haley said a lie purity culture teaches men if a woman dresses a certain way, she's asking for it. Quote, she's asking for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll take one more before we move on. Anyone have one more?
Dylan's got your last one. He said, a lie purity culture teaches men is that sex is a man's right.
That's a great one. Yes. Sex is not a man's right, but it is definitely the lie that is taught. Not a woman's right, but yeah. Thank you for sharing those, all of you. I really appreciate that and your responsiveness to this. So just like one of you mentioned rape culture, and so this slide is going to be talking about rape culture. A culture in which women are expected to remain virgins until marriage is a rape culture. In that vision, women's bodies are for use primarily for procreation or male pleasure. While purity culture does affect men and women through shame and the lies it tells, it also gives men in particular permission to do what they want to do with their partner, which can lead to violence. This was not considered rape in the past, and sometimes it still isn't considered rape or violence because they're together, they're considered a family unit. It's a culture where rape either doesn't count or it's a classic rape story that doesn't happen within our personal lives or with people we know. It only happens in books or movies. It also says that any woman that ever wanted sex deserves what she gets, especially if she isn't married. If you don't protect your virginity, you're fair game. And so in that sense, if you don't protect your virginity, you're fair game. That also leads into the reason for dress codes. Why do schools specifically have dress codes? What is the main reason? Can anyone tell me?
To regulate women.
Yeah. I asked my principal why we had a dress code because, you know, teachers left and right would be sending kids home because they had tank tops on, and it just didn't make sense why they would be sent home for a shirt that they were wearing that otherwise covered everything else up but showed their shoulders. And he couldn't tell me why we had a dress code. And you know, it's hard to see kids being influenced by purity culture still today due to dress codes and what that says about women's bodies and that huge double standard between how women have to dress and how men dress. Again, please forgive the binary terms between men and women.
You had two people in the comment that said similar things. Sarah said to not, quote, distract males, and then Amelia said to not tempt men. And then Katie also said, they also say that it is so that no one feels left out for not being able to afford name brand clothing. Which
yeah, I think that
only
sorry,
good
go ahead.
things I could, sorry. I think that would be one of the only good things I could think of that would come from any sort of dress code. But I thought of was it's always blown my mind that teachers and administrators have been willing to disrupt a girl's school day. Like she is sent home to change and disrupt her learning experience just because her shoulder was showing, or she might have had too much cleavage or whatever, which teaches women that, you know, modesty is their most important asset, that their learning is less important than the way that men react to them.
And if dressed in a certain way, your body is to be ashamed of.
Yes, absolutely. Dylan also said, when my wife was like 10 years old, someone in her church wrote a letter to her parents that her skirt was too short.
Yeah, that again, you know, that's adults mixing in with kids and over sexualizing them. That is just not necessary and not okay to impose purity culture on others. But unfortunately, it happens.
Yes, I agree with what you said, Chloe. I moved from Pennsylvania to Tennessee, and I had a pair of shorts that I wore when I was going to school up north that never had any issues with. But when I moved down south, they said that my shorts were too short because they did like the fingertip test. Like you stand up straight and you have to put your hands down to see if your arms will reach past your shorts. And if they did, then they would send you home.
And when men and women are going through puberty, there are just so many different body sizes. And it's an awkward time. It really is. I remember being super awkward and just feeling weird in my body. And being told that you don't look okay, you need to go home and change is embarrassing. And just not encouraging to kids and not, again, not okay. Anyone else for the previous slide? Sorry about that.
Haley said the church has historically put the impetus on women for keeping men from, quote, lusting. And ironically, the actual Bible text does the opposite. The biblical text puts the impetus on men. And in that sense, dress codes are really anti-biblical. I think I saw something similar to this on Facebook, but it was talking about how the Bible quote, I'm pretty sure, is something like, if you're lusting after them, like pluck your own eyes out. And it was talking to the men, like if this is like pluck your own eyes out if it's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of this says that it's from the biblical sense, but it's really not. A lot of it is taken out of context, for sure. So not only does purity culture affect rape culture, it also affects diet culture. And so while I don't discuss diet culture in this presentation, I do feel it is very significant to discuss here in this slide. And these are some ways that purity culture is eerily similar to diet culture. So purity culture operates on the basis that your body and its desires for sex are wrong. Diet culture operates on the basis that your body and its desires for food are wrong. Purity culture encourages people to take extreme measures to control healthy sexual desires. Diet culture encourages people to take extreme measures to control healthy appetite for food. Purity culture creates feelings of shame and failure when you can't control your sexual thoughts and feelings. Diet culture creates feelings of shame and failure when you can't control your appetite for food. Purity culture sets you up for failure from the beginning. So does diet culture. And purity culture sometimes shows up in a new shiny package like New Age spirituality, but it's the same old crap. And diet culture sometimes shows up in a new package like lifestyle modifications, but it's the same old crap. Speaking of effects that purity culture has, not only on rape culture and diet culture, it also has, it not only damages the rape and diet culture, but it also through society, physically and psychologically. So the societal messages that we are receiving and that the youth are receiving are abstinence only expectations. Absolutely no sexual contact, not even masturbation. Rigid gender norms. Okay, like I said before, this totally excludes the LGBTQ community and anyone that is non-binary. There is specifically males and females, and that is it. Slut shaming, dress codes, complementarianism, which is again where men are head of the household, women are meant to serve the men and make them happy through sex and through serving them. Therefore, they complement each other. Psychological effects include shame, trauma, self-blame, PTSD, poor mental health. Physical effects include panic attacks, pain during sex, low desire for sex, vaginismus, which is when your vagina contracts painfully during sex because there is a mental block, because you have been told that sex is bad. Same thing with erectile dysfunction. All of those psychological and physical effects are because you have been told that sex is bad for your whole life. So when you get married and on your wedding night, it doesn't just flip off for you. You are still in your mind telling yourself, oh my gosh, sex is bad. which is why you have panic attacks, which is why you have pain during sex, low desire for sex, vaginismus, and erectile dysfunction. So the psychological message that delivers toxic shame is that sex is bad. That is ultimately what I want to leave you with this slide, is because of all of these, because of all the societal effects, you get these psychological and physical effects. This is a video featuring a pastor named Mike Todd. He's the one in the blue jacket. And he was famous for delivering sermons on relationships. And I just want you to hear what he says, and I would love for you to give your initial reaction in the chat. So we'll just listen to like a minute of it. Let me make sure I can share the sound. Yes, okay.
And repressive ways.
This is how you start off, by watching men and women have sex, and it's never enough. So the bar goes up, and now that doesn't satisfy me. Now I'm watching men and women, and now I'm watching bestiality, men having sex with animals, and now I'm watching people have sex with poop, and I'm watching people have sex with trees, and I'm watching people beat people in slavery, and now I'm watching pedophilia.
Holy moly.
Because when you get into perversion, you'll steal, you'll lie, you'll manipulate, you'll change.
I will do a video in the near future about pornography myself, because it is very nuanced and I have very complicated feelings about it. But this is not it. Your masturbation does not lead to lying, cheating, stealing, and immediately into depraved behavior, aka watching people in non-consensual sexual situations and finding that erotic. Again, fear. These are fear-based lies about male sexuality.
Pornography gradually lets you kill you. All it takes is a bound person meeting a right opportunity to meet their demise. Because when you open the door to perversion, everything is fair game.
And of course, like we saw in the Atlanta shooting, when your sexuality is overtaking you, when
And so this video that I found was featured on a channel called God is Gray. And so the whole video is actually an hour and 15 minutes long. It's very good. I will send you the link if anyone's interested. But I would love to hear some of your initial reactions to this, and perhaps what you think the motivation is behind his message.
You got some shocked folks in the comments, but Kathy said, "Oh my word, my thought is he's the perversion," which I definitely agree with.
Mm-hmm.
That slippery slope logic of, well, if you do this, then this really horrible hyperbolic thing will happen, is my least favorite logical fallacy of this fear mongering that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy also said, think that people like him are looking for a platform that gives them the attention that they crave.
That's very insightful. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Haley, yes. Haley said, I think the opposite is true from what he says. Too much sexual repression may lead to sexual expression coming out, quote, sideways. And then Jordan said, more shame and fear being spread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the motivation behind this is fear. Ultimately, he is using fear to scare people into not having sex and to not sexually exploring themselves in a healthy way. And so these were popular videos that were shown by youth pastors. I was shown some of them when I was in youth group. And I know several of my friends knew of Mike Todd. So yeah, just something to think about when, you know, we think about the media that some of the kids are watching. You might think about porn, but at the same time, you also have this, which is fear-based. And so, you know, where is purity culture at today? We may not see these extremes as much anymore, which brings hope. You know, in 2018, Joshua Harris renounced his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He actually gave a public apology for it. And while it didn't undo the damage it did, he recognized it. He recognized the damage, and the book is now not being published anymore. Purity rings are less popular now that celebrities are no longer seen wearing them. Abstinence-only education is still around today. The next slide, we will see the different states that stress abstinence-only education versus the states that maybe don't require it, or it's covered, but it's not necessarily, you know, an equal part of the curriculum. Purity culture is still present, but has lessened its hold on the millennial generation as many have deconstructed from the religious beliefs they grew up in. It is still ever present in many evangelical circles. So I don't know if any of you have heard of the song Modest is Hottest by Matthew West. He just released it in June. And it was really sad to see such an influential Christian artist release a song this damaging, and this, it was like we took many steps back in purity culture, and it was actually met with so much opposition that he took it down, took the song down, which I find hopeful. I think that it is very important that people in the Christian community voice their opinion and voice the fact that this is not okay. This tells women that they need to dress how they should dress because of men's minds and men not being able to control themselves. Therefore, we need to control women. So that was an encouraging note. I know that might sound bad, but it was encouraging to me. And here is the map of the United States where abstinence education is in America. So all the blue states, you can see there's 25 of them. They stress abstinence in their sex education. So this is where abstinence is either required or the state requires it. And it's either an equal part of the curriculum or has more of the curriculum than the actual sex education. The gray states, abstinence is not required. The states just have to deliver sex education and HIV information. And then the green states is where abstinence is covered, but it's not an equal part of the curriculum. It's just, hey, we encourage you to abstain from sex until marriage, but here is the actual sex education. Unfortunately, most of these do not include inclusive sex education, where they deliver sex education in terms of LGBTQ communities. I believe the thought there is that if they teach sex ed in different circumstances, then kids will have sex in those different circumstances, which research has shown that that is not true. So how do we heal from purity culture? Purity culture has caused a lot of damage. One of my biggest recommendations is therapy. There's such a thing as sex therapy. So if you are struggling with having sex with your partner, or maybe even you don't have a partner and you're still struggling with having sex, I highly recommend a sex therapist. They know about purity culture and the effects it has. A lot of them deal with religious trauma due to purity culture. If you're looking for a therapist and you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, or you want to be, involved in that, I highly, highly recommend you look for a therapist that specifically states they see people in the LGBTQ plus community. Check their wording, make sure it's not offensive. Person-centered therapy is where, usually there's a power dynamic between the therapist and the client, and person-centered therapy really brings that power dynamic down to an equal footing. And so the client leads where the therapy goes. I have experienced this. I highly recommend it. And also there is EMDR and tapping, which therapy also offers. EMDR is like a specific way to help with PTSD, and tapping is as well. Some books that you can read to keep yourself informed are The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel A. Vanderkolk. I just read this book. I found it extremely helpful. It talked about how, war vets came in with PTSD symptoms. People from religious trauma came in with the same symptoms. And it talks about how our bodies have memories, have traumatic memories, and they remember where that trauma is. And so that kind of goes along with the erectile dysfunction, pain during sex, vaginismus, anything like that. So I highly recommend reading that. It really brings a great understanding, and you don't need to be a professional therapist to read it. The other book I would recommend you read is called Pure by Linda K. Klein. It's about a woman that is recovering from purity culture, and it is also very good. Also, another thing is that you can do right now is talk about it, research it, raise awareness about it, stop the shame, and write. Whether you're writing privately or publicly, whatever you do, get your feelings out. Ultimately gain control of your life. You are in charge of where you want to go, who you want to be with, and who you want to be. Four things that you can do to help yourself overcome purity culture is, first, recognize and question your views on sexuality. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? 2, don't be too hard on yourself. This is a process. Sometimes this is a lifelong process. 3, use your anger to fuel your work. And if you're not feeling anger, use your emotions, your disappointment, your sadness, your happiness to be free. Use that to fuel your work, your research, your writing. And 4, and in my opinion, the most significant and important part is surround yourself with people who have your back. Get a good support system. And if you don't have a good support system, I will be part of your support system. My email is at the end of this presentation. Feel free to reach out. A future without purity culture looks like, a future without purity culture expects comprehensive sex education without the expectation of abstinence. It encourages all to explore themselves as sexual beings without shame. It opens up conversations about sex and gender. It respects individuality and accepts one for who they are. A future without purity culture is where one takes responsibility for one's own actions, and it creates space for mental health care and support. Ultimately, a future without purity culture is respect for yourself and for others. Here are my sources. And thank you very much for attending this training. I really appreciate your participation and time.
Mackenzie, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. I did want to share a comment that Dylan had that I will take with me every day. Deconstructing your religious beliefs is often misunderstood as not having any religious beliefs, at least from my experience, from my family and my wife's family. I could not agree more. I think people get kind of freaked out when they hear you need to deconstruct your religious beliefs, but it's just a learning process. It's not that you can't have religious beliefs. It's not that you can't maintain your faith in some way. You just need to look at it more critically. So I appreciate that comment.
It's about finding your why you believe what you do.
Absolutely. Katie also said that she has seen purity rings and other purity accessories at Hobby Lobby, which Hobby Lobby has been problematic for a minute. So I'm not surprised, but I am a little surprised.
Granted, this is Katie. Granted, they were in the clearance section. So I think that they're kind of, catching on to the current climate of things. But I was still surprised because I grew up in I grew up Church of Nazareth. So it really wasn't a conversation in that sort of realm of things. The church I went to anyway, they were pretty open, like come as you are sort of mentality. So I never really had conversations like that. And I never really met anyone who had conversations like that until college. So I think it also just depends on, I guess, your realm of the world. Like my parents were pretty open, liberal people. So it was never really a conversation. We had like safe conversations like, what should you do if you feel uncomfortable, things like that. But we never had those sort of conversations. So it definitely was eye-opening to me to see how other people view purity and things like that. So the conversation is it never not strikes me, if you will. It's always kind of like, wow, there are people who think like this. So yeah.
I was going to say the same. I was brought up in a very conservative home with conservative parents, and I was out of high school and married by the time this in the 90s when this started to grow here in the country. But even being raised in such a conservative home and with conservative parents, I never heard this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone who has been, I'll say, subjected to it. I've heard of it, but some of it's just been shocking to me. Interesting, I saw this morning, I think it was a Facebook or Instagram meme, and it was a statement by someone, I don't recall the man's name or even his credentials, but it was about purity culture and how as girls are taught by society to be givers and boys are taught to be takers. And until we change that, and the perception about sex and that women can enjoy sex and should enjoy sex as well. And we just have so much to work with. There's so much work that we have to do to change that culture and thought pattern. But Mackenzie, thank you. This was so interesting.
Thank you. I really appreciate your input.
Kathy, I feel like that's something Glennon Doyle would say. I don't know if that was a Doyle.
I'm going to go back and look and see because it was more, I look at, social media while I'm having my coffee in the morning. So I probably was reading it with one eye open, but it caught my eye because, knowing that this workshop was coming up this afternoon. So I'll go back and try to find it and I'll let you know, Chloe. I almost sent it to you and I thought, no, I'll be talking to her later today.
Well, I was dyed in the wool of purity culture at a church in mine and Kathy's hometown that I will not name. But
see, I'm removed from there. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
That, just thank goodness.
Yes.
Well, my niece ended up graduating from there. She transferred in like her junior or senior year.
Yeah.
And her dad's a minister, but I still think that's far-fetched from what they try to do with her. I don't think it goes to that extreme, but yeah, I get it that that particular school and church are mired in this kind of belief.
Mackenzie, you had a comment from Amelia that says, it amazes me how people are expected to switch gears from abstinence to having a sexual relationship overnight and not have deep-rooted shame and anxiety over it.
Yeah, it doesn't just change like that. I mean, it's a process.
Yeah.
And the thought is that it's, you know, like a Cinderella wedding, you know, you're just gonna be perfect as soon as you get married. And that's just not the reality.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments before we end things today? Oh, Dylan said, if you haven't already heard or seen it, if you look up First General Baptist in Malden, Missouri, there is a preacher there who just enables abuse. The YouTube video you showed today, the woman reacts to him as well. I'll have to look that up. That's interesting. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your input today. You all were very engaged and active, and I love to see that. So I hope you all got some fantastic things to take away from Mackenzie's fabulous presentation. So if you'll have any questions, like she said, Mackenzie's email is here. I think most of you have my email. Just shoot us an email, shoot us a message. If you have any emails from me, my number is at the bottom, so you can call me as well. So just let us know. And thank you all so much. And I will shamelessly plug our next Lunch and Learn, which will be August 19th. And it is the fabulous Phyllis Lewis talking to us about how to engage with LGBTQ victims of sexual assault and domestic violence after Pride. So ways to incorporate Pride all year round, not just in the Pride month. So really excited for that. You all show up, show out, and you all have a great and fantastic day and a great weekend.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks, Mackenzie.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.